Welcome to the Backpack Show, everybody. Chris Brogan is traveling, and so he's not here today. But don't worry, we'll still have dad jokes because Katie Robbert, co-founder and CEO of the data firm Trust Insights, is here. We're going to talk about leadership and management in terms of helping your team to perform their best, especially when your team has some very interesting personalities on it. She knows all about that. So stick around because we're about to have a whole lot of fun.
Backpack Show.
So I have to thank a couple of sponsors first because Chris always forgets this part. So I like to rub it in his face that I didn't forget. So first of all, if you would like to have a show like this one, get your own CEO and then go to cbrogan.net/StreamYard and you can get yourself a free trial of all the fine functionality you will enjoy today. If you want to have an audio podcast, castos.com makes it stupid easy. I can promise you that because Chris handles our podcast and he just wouldn't do it if it wasn't easy. And if you'd like a .online domain, go to cbrogan.net/online. You can get one for less than $1 for a whole year if you use the code Chris, but you have to enter it in all caps because reasons. And if you want to use a different search engine, try Presearch, the decentralized search engine. You can earn crypto rewards if you're logged in while you're using it. It's a very fine search engine created by people who are tired of Google playing games with small businesses. So check it out at presearch.com. Hey, we did it.
Hey.
I got them all in. I'm so excited. We never do that. Okay.
You even sounded like you knew what you were talking about.
Well, because I've heard it 167,000 times. Hey, Coach Woodard. Happy Friday. Veterans Day, everyone in the States. Hi, Chloe, my favorite Scottish web designer.
Who likes to break into other people's houses.
Hi, Carl. Chloe. In fairness, that was an accident. Chloe broke into someone's house.
An accidental B&E.
By accident. Right. I mean, no, she definitely entered on purpose, but I think the B part of the B&E, that was the part. Carol from Canada.
Hi, Carol.
Canada Carol. So leadership, I guess it probably makes some sense to go back to where you and Christopher Penn first met and how you got the team at your previous company performing before we get into how you managed to keep them in line today.
I mean, it's funny. People love this story because it's so bonkers. So I always have to start with I'll start with the short version of my job interview. So I was working at a company I'd been at for about a decade. And I was looking to make a change. And I was a, technical project manager, product manager, marketing manager. I wore all the hats. And so the HR manager at the agency that Chris worked at gave me a call and she said, I don't know if you're looking, but, I have a job and I think that you would be really good at. And I said, cool. I don't know anything about marketing technology. And she said, it doesn't matter. She said, you have the right personality for the team. And I was like, okay. Little did I know it was to manage Chris. Well, technically Chris was my manager, but we all know how that goes. So, the job interview was wacky. It was 7:00 on a Tuesday morning. And, Chris let me into the building and then, scurried away into, I'm assuming what was the correct term.
Did you even know he was the person you were going to meet with? Or you're just
I had no idea.
Just let me in.
He didn't say anything to me. It was so weird. And so I sat down, he did rapid fire questions for about 10 minutes, which I don't know how many of them I answered. And then he left and made himself coffee and just left me sitting in the room. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. Oh yeah, he totally left me in the room. And so then he came back about 5 minutes later, had some coffee for himself, none for me. And then I think we concluded the interview and I left and I called my friend who was the HR manager. I'm like, well, that was strange. And she goes, well, he wants to hire you. And I was like, okie dokie. It can't be worse than where I'm at now. And so that's
making your own coffee. But,
Well, and which is fine. I honestly didn't trust him to not poison me anyway. So
fair.
I was fine making my own coffee. So I started at the agency working as the manager of Chris's team. He was the VP of the team. And we very quickly bonded over our lack of tolerance for bullshit, basically. And so we were able to build our team out from about 3 people to about 11 people very quickly. I was only there for about 18 months. The company got bought out and Chris and I decided that we would be better off doing our own thing because the services we wanted to provide didn't align with the direction the company that we were at was going in. So we
Hold
left,
on
started
one sec,
Trust
though.
Insights.
So you grew the team. Were you letting Mr. scurry away and get his own coffee hire and coach, or were you doing it?
No.
Okay.
So that was one of the first things that changed. So I was the last person that Chris had input on the hiring process for. So Chris hired me and then immediately was respectfully removed from that process altogether, and he left all the hiring to me.
Lori says Chris has already admitted he can be weird. Christopher Penn, to be fair, both he
Yes.
and Chris Brogan, who's usually hosting, are weird.
Yes. This is Christopher Penn. And
Right.
but that's the thing. He was fine with that because that's not his strength. And so as we talk about leadership and management, one of my first, responsibilities was to identify the strengths and weaknesses within the team. And for Chris, regardless of the fact that he was the person in charge of the team, his strength is not in people management and team building and project management. And those are my strengths. And so, for the sake of the team, he basically, let me take charge of everything. And he was just sort of like the face of the team. He was the one who would go to the pitches and the client meetings, and I was wrangling the rest of everything else because we were able to identify he's good at this thing over here. I'm better at this thing over here. So let's just, be good at what we're good at. And that's one of the reasons why Chris and I work so well together, is because we don't try to step on each other's toes, and we don't try to be like, well, I know it says in my job description or everybody else's job description says that I'm supposed to be this. So I'm just going to go ahead and be this, even though I'm bad at it. So that was actually one of the things that we changed when we started Trust Insights was, I took over the role of CEO, not Chris, and Chris took on the role of chief data scientist. And, it was a little daunting at first because in my brain, the CEO is the face of the company. It's the person who's like, the public, visionary, that kind of thing. I'm not that person. I'm an introvert. I can go a whole day without saying 2 words to anyone and be totally fine with it.
Most people probably really love that because they love to talk and not shut up.
I'm an excellent listener.
You really are. Dean wants a backpack show talking about weird interviews, by the way.
Oh, well, I mean, I've got a whole arsenal of those stories.
Yeah, a really old guy called me good girl once. We could get into that, but not today. Not today.
No, I mean,
No.
we'll see how much time we have at the end. And so, we decided it was fine for me to be in the leadership role and not be the face of the company. And so that was one of the big things. We wanted to start to, make our own rules with Trust Insights. And so we continued to identify each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I feel like that's why we work so well together now, even, gosh, Trust Insights just turned 5.
Wow.
I know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Toddlers and all. Carol wants to know, do you think it's important to push out of your respective comfort zones?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris pushes me to be a little more public, have
Talk
a
to
bit more of a
people.
public voice. And so one of the ways that we did that was I took over writing the intro to the newsletter, which is our inbox insights that goes out every Wednesday.
It has like 100% less martial arts in it.
Well,
when you took it over.
I made the assumption that Chris had to, because Chris was more comfortable being public, that it was fine for him to do all of the public writing. And what we realized after about 18 months was I needed to have a voice outside of the company so that I could start to steer the ship a little bit more clearly, that it was more, concrete, the direction we were trying to take the company in, because I'm more of the pragmatic, here's how we're going to do things in a very process way. I'm not someone who's big on the big lofty ideas that have no, ties to back to the ground.
Those are the fun conversations to have, like while you're waiting for a webinar to start. Chris and I specialize in that. Go right up to the minute and scare the organizers with the random stuff we're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is fun. I agree.
It is
that.
super fun, but yeah, you can't run a business like that. And
Yeah.
that says we're going to be good at what we're good at, not try to be the things we're not good at. Love the morphing of the roles, definitely. John Wall says 100% less martial arts. He's just here to
Publicly.
moderate. Publicly correct.
Well, and
And
it's I
Mark
should sort
says
of
that both Chris's are weird. and
I
they're
should
equally
say
located.
that when I first started working with Chris, before I really got to know him, it was very much like a Dread Pirate Robert situation where every single day I would show up to work, and every single day Chris would remind me that my center of gravity put me at a disadvantage because of my height, and therefore, just because he was smaller than me didn't mean that he didn't have the advantage if he were to try to take me out.
Right.
And of course, I'm standing here with my notebook and I'm like, that's nice. Here's the 10 things we need to do today.
Of course, he had no idea at that point that you were like a bar brawler from way back.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, that you fight dirty. Or else he maybe would have reassessed things. Yeah.
And so that was like every day for the first 3 months of me working with him. So there was a lot of martial arts at the beginning, but we very quickly realized that I did not pose a physical threat to Chris. I had no desire to fight him.
He's like Baba Yaga at our house because I'll tell the kids, like, I will learn how to make poisons from common household items. Just need to ask my friend Chris. Table thrower, says John Wall. Yeah,
I mean, I have flipped a table or two in my life, but that's not why we're here.
No, but you have a small team right now.
Yeah.
I just want to jump back for 1 second to your earlier experience, because you got the team at the previous company where you and Chris were performing to an incredible level. And I think that's something people don't realize. Like, even if your team is not necessarily, like, you don't view that as underperforming, they could be doing so much better. So what did you do to get that team doing the best possible work?
Well, so when I inherited the team, there were
Chloe wants bar brawler stories. Hey, listen, just because you're an outlaw doesn't mean the rest of us want to stay in those outlaw
She's mad
days
because
forever.
I called her out for breaking and entering.
Just accidental.
When I inherited the team at the prior agency, it was about 3 people, and there was a lot of different they were doing things very differently. There was no process. I think one of the first questions I asked them was, can I take a look at your standard operating procedures? And they all looked at me like I had 5 heads, because it was a phrase nobody had ever heard. And I was like, a set of documents, anything. And they just didn't exist. And so that was where we started, was by documenting what the heck people were doing, because I only had 3 people, but everything was being done 3 different ways. And that was something that we could fix right away. We could identify where there was repeatability. We could identify where there was automation, but even just that consistency. So that was where we started to get some consistency about how things were done. And that's when we realized, okay, we can grow, we can add more people, because the amount of time that tasks are taking has been reduced significantly. And now we have more room to take on more clients, to bring on new team members, to train them. Now we actually have materials to train with, because there's documentation around what we're doing. So we grew the team from 3 people. I think when we left, it was about 11 people. And we were carrying $3 million in revenue, which was the second highest profitable team in the agency at that time.
Where was it when you started?
I want to say it was about 100,000. So we grew it, significantly over just a very short amount of time. We grew it to about 3 million.
So looking for things that we're repeating, establishing some process around it, maybe adding in some strategic automations, and then like defining people's roles a little bit better, it sounds like. Okay.
And that was definitely, there was no real sense of who was doing what, who reported to who. We wanted to get a little bit more consistency with the clients themselves, so that they would get the same experience over and over again. And so starting to identify clearer roles for account managers, clearer roles for analysts, but also giving the internal team things to shoot for, things to strive for, because there was no real understanding of how promotions would work or how professional development would work. So we had to put all of those plans in place, so that somebody who had just started as a marketing analyst knew, okay, these are the stepping stones I need to, build on to become a senior marketing analyst or to become an account manager. And that was one of the things that we also did differently from the other teams in the agency, was I started to break off the roles into different tracks, because at that time when I joined, your only upward mobility was to become an account manager, and then an account director, and then a VP. Not everybody is meant to be a manager. Chris is a great example of that, and he would be the first one to say so. And I had really strong performers on my team that wanted nothing to do with being a manager. They wanted to learn deeper analytics. They wanted to get more technical,
But be an individual contributor.
be an individual contributor, and they were excellent at it. And so why would I move them out of that role just to give them upward mobility that they didn't want? And so we started to create separate tracks for that deeper technical knowledge.
Right.
So
Like,
that
feel free to pay me more money and give me more vacation time and stuff.
But, becoming a manager would mean that they couldn't be an individual contributor anymore. And that sort of goes back to recognizing people's strengths and weaknesses. If you have a high performer on your team that has expressed that they don't want to be a manager and they are not, that's just not what they're good at, then why do companies keep putting those people in those positions, setting them up for failure? So that was something I really wanted to change when I was at the agency was, how do we set people up for success, not failure? And it's really just understanding what they want to do and what they're good at. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it comes at a cost because you have to sort of go against the culture that the company as a whole has created. Like, this is the promotion track. These are the expectations. Now you want to do something differently. I don't know if that's going to work. So there was a lot of proposals. There was a lot of justifications. There was a lot of research and analysis to demonstrate why this was a better outcome for everybody. I didn't need more managers. I needed more individual contributors.
I'm like an Aquaman style manager, like, I do it because I have to, because there's nobody else. It's the only reason I ever do it. So Coach Woodard says, standard operating procedures and documentation created room for more business. Many creatives resist standard operating procedures because of the belief that they stifle creativity and thus profitability. And Carol says, get the stuff to take care of itself and you have more space to be creative.
Yeah, it's interesting. Process is not the enemy of creativity and innovation. It's actually what's going to allow you to do more of it because, think about, I guess, like Steve Jobs is a really great example. So he wore the same outfit every day so that he could take away just even a certain percentage of decision making that he had to do. So his day was very regimented, very consistent, always wore the same black turtleneck, always wore the same dad jeans, the white shoes. It didn't matter if he was like in fashion or out of fashion. It gave his brain space the ability to focus on creativity and innovation because all of those other processes were just completely automated. Probably same breakfast, probably had his coffee the same way, same outfit. Like, you automate as much as you can that's repeatable and consistent. So then you have that space to be creative and innovative. Now, with the caveat that putting those processes together does take upfront time. But if you invest that time up front, then you'll have all of that space, behind it to do bigger things, to do greater things, to scale.
Chloe says, removing decision fatigue. That's how I justify eating the same exact food every day. That's
It's
really
true.
smart because when you break into someone's house, you don't know for sure like what they're going to have. So makes sense.
So, having a plan ahead of time
Yeah, exactly.
is good. I wouldn't necessarily call that premeditated B&E, but it might fall under that category.
It might.
Accidental premeditation.
Accidental. One of the things that even with a small team, you have to be so focused on is goals and what you're trying to do. But not just, I feel like some people set goals like sitting around a conference table, shooting the breeze, thinking, where do we want to be in a year? And it's very like, it's cool, it's aspirational and stuff. But are those goals actually what you need to move the business forward? So how do you kind of figure that part of it out? Like, are your goals the right goals? Are your metrics the right metrics?
It also it comes down to starting to drill down from there. So like I can say, I want a goal for my company to be $5 million in revenue next year. Okay, great. How do I start to put tangible, pieces and milestones into that so that I can know, am I meeting that goal? Can I meet that goal? Do I even have the resources to meet that goal? Who's involved in us reaching that goal? And I think that, what I've seen and what I've experienced is the people who are setting the goals are so far removed from the people responsible for those goals being achieved, that's where the disconnect comes from. And so, first and foremost, people want to know, how does this impact me? We're all selfish to a certain extent, and we want to know what's in this for me, what do I need to do, how does this impact me, how does this change my job, how does this change my responsibility? And so if you have a leadership team setting goals, they then need to have that trickle down and think about, okay, so all the way down to the intern who just started yesterday, how are they impacted by this goal that we just set? So that they know their role in all of this, so that they can take ownership, so that they know what they're working toward. And so that was something with, previous teams, older jobs. I've run teams for, I guess I must have started working when I was 5, because I've been running teams for about 20 years. So, if you do the
Running
math
your family's
there.
house.
Mm.
So the rich and interesting conversation in the comments. Chloe says, stop. It was orange juice. I drank their orange juice when she broke into the person's house. I guess she got herself some juice. Carol says, I bet it was especially delicious. Chloe.
I mean, it must have
And
been. It's B&E worthy.
stolen juice always tastes better.
It's true.
Everybody knows that. Dean says, I've been wearing the same sweatpants since March 2020, but it has nothing to do with optimizing decision processes. I mean, I hope you wash them once in a while. That's the only thing. And Lori says that, behaving sort of like Steve Jobs gives people creativity space, people around him, because they're not putting mental energy into stuff. Carol says, you don't look a day over 20, Katie.
Thank you, Carol. Your check is in the mail.
Well, one of the things that Trust Insights is great at is helping businesses figure out like which metrics actually do move you towards your goals. Because there's a little bit of like, what's the right word? Reactivity, where people are like, well, we have access to this data, so this is what we track. And it's like, cool, but what if that data has nothing to do with the goals that you just set? Like, how do you figure that out?
Yeah, it's data overload, and it's definitely shiny object syndrome. And so what we really challenge ourselves to do, and we fall victim to shiny object syndrome all the time. It's human nature. You're kind of just curious. Chris likes to say data without decision is just distraction. And he's right. Now, there are certain metrics you're like, oh, that would be cool just to know, but you really have to challenge yourself of, am I going to make a decision with this? So do I need to focus on it? So it's a way to sort of prioritize. And so what we do, once we set a goal, we go through an exercise called a KPI map, so a key performance indicator. And so really what that boils down to is, what are the metrics that we need to consider that are going to help us understand whether or not we're meeting this goal, so that we can start to break it down into those milestones. And so, if I say, my revenue goal is $5 million, then I need to start to understand what metrics are going to tell me, aside from, the money in the bank, whether or not I've reached that goal. So I need to start to backtrack into, well, does total number of Twitter followers, affect my revenue? Probably not. Does total number of website visits affect my revenue? Oh yeah, that definitely does, because people need to come to my website to learn, who we are, what we do. And so we start to break it down by those phases of a customer journey. So you have awareness, engagement, purchase. It's a very basic customer journey, but everybody goes through some version of that. And so what metrics are we tracking at each of those phases that then roll up into revenue? And so for revenue, you would imagine, well, I need to understand how many leads I have in my pipeline. Well, how do leads get in my pipeline? Well, they sign up for our newsletter. Okay, how many people are subscribing to our newsletter? How do they get on the subscriber list? And so working backward that way helps you understand what metrics you need to be looking at, and then you can sort of set those micro goals to say, okay, if I want $5 million in revenue by the end of the year, I need to have, 10x more newsletter subscribers by mid-year. And so that's the way you start to track it.
You can even test whether the metrics that seem to be correlated with achieving your goals actually are, or if it's just like coincidental, like if it's causal or coincidental. I talked with Chris Penn about that on my AppFire work management show about choosing the right KPIs. Deb's got to take off. Bye, Deb. Good to see you. And Annette says this conversation is a leadership gold mine and hilarious too. Thank you.
We did
And
promise the shenanigans.
we did, as promised. Carol says, how often do you set and then revise your plans? And is it a very formal process?
I mean, nothing I do is formal. So let's just, I mean, I have
You
my,
definitely have a business face, though.
oh, no, I have the business face, but I'm definitely
Mhm.
wearing my reindeer PJ pants. So not
Nice.
super formal.
Right on.
Um,
I've worn
no,
jeans for like 5 years. Not the same jeans,
I mean,
Dean.
if they are, who am I to judge, Gary? We set our goals once a year, but we revisit them at least once a quarter on our more formal, board meeting. And that meeting is the purpose of that meeting is to make the space and time to look at how we're tracking against our goals, to look at, do these goals still make sense for us? So, for example, last year we started launching the Trust Insights Academy, which are courses that people can purchase and, go through at their own pace. That's not something that we had as a goal for the previous year. So we had to figure out, where does that fit into everything? And this year, when we were setting our goals for 2023, that became a focus of passive revenue. So where does that fit in? What percentage of our revenue comes from those courses? And so by evaluating at least once a quarter, you know, are we on track? Are these even the right goals? Have we started something new? What's changed in the industry, in the market, with our customers that we should be factoring in or taking out? That helps us figure out, okay, these are still the right goals. And that's one of the things that I think companies get wrong. Goals aren't static. Goals aren't set it and forget it. They're very much a living, breathing thing that needs to be evaluated regularly. And it's okay if you got it wrong, or it's okay if it changes. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're adaptive and agile, and you're being less reactive and more proactive to what's going on around you.
So John Wall would like us to know Levi's 30% off for Target Red Card holders today. Thanks,
Always helpful,
John.
John. Always
Appreciate it.
helpful.
And Dean says, what's most common? Companies don't use data for decision making. They use the wrong data for decision making, or companies use the right data but don't act on it. So what in your experience is the most common? I feel like it's like all
All of the
three.
above.
Yeah.
All of the above. We talk about this a lot on in our content for Trust Insights, is that companies have the data, but they don't use it because it's not telling them the story that they want to hear. It doesn't align with the story, the narrative that they're trying to spin. And that's one of the things that we try to bring to the table, is to shed that, fear and apprehension around the data telling you something you don't want to know. That's actually a good thing, because it means then you can do something about it. And the sooner you learn that the data is moving in the wrong direction, then you have an opportunity to fix it. But if you don't look at your data for, more than once a year, you've missed a lot of opportunities to, course correct. And then you have a lot of explaining to do as to why things didn't work out the way you wanted them to. And so I would say it's all of the above. They're either looking at the wrong data, they're looking at the data and saying, that doesn't tell me what I want to know, so I'm going to ignore it. Or they're just not looking at any data at all because they think they know best. And a lot of that comes down to us as humans. We're insecure. We want to feel confident. And a lot of times the data doesn't do that. It doesn't give us that immediate assurance that things are going right. But if you have that confidence to say, you know what, it's okay that the data is telling me things are going wrong, I can fix it.
So Tom Webster taught me years ago that you should be looking at the data to prove yourself wrong. So if you're, for example, thinking, I think more newsletter signups will drive revenue or is correlated with revenue, set out to prove that they don't contribute. And that way you'll actually recognize data that maybe is contrary to what you were hoping to see. So one little hack for courtesy of Tom Webster. You've answered this question before, but you get a second bite at the apple, as they say. Katie, what goes in your backpack for success?
What goes in my back? Well,
Could be a
probably
physical thing or a non-physical thing. You get to choose.
the non-physical thing is definitely surrounding myself with the right people who are supportive rather than destructive. And that was a hard lesson to learn for a long time, because there were a lot of people that I was surrounding myself with that I thought had my best interest, but really they were holding me back because they were insecure about their ability to move up. So therefore, by sort of like having their hand on my forehead and saying, not now, just this isn't right for you, or no, I was like, oh, well, they must know something that I don't. Yeah, what they knew was that they didn't trust themselves.
They got
And
very
so,
uncomfortable with you doing things they weren't comfortable doing themselves,
right.
pushing themselves that way.
So that definitely goes into my backpack. But also, probably some non-dairy coffee creamer, because I can't find it everywhere and I always need coffee. So that
So
definitely goes in my backpack for success.
Chip says put Chris in the backpack and zip it out so you can just pull him out when needed. Either one of us could use that tip because we each have a Chris.
That's true.
Dean says, I did a report once and was told to take out the parts that made us look bad. All right. Well, Dean,
That's very common.
I was a practicing attorney and I was told never tell a client they can't do something they want to do. So my job was to find a way to make it legal, basically.
But that's, Dean makes a really good point. That's such a common thing. Like, oh, just take out the ugly parts and just make us look like a shining star. But then you're not fixing the problems. You're not fixing the things that are broken, that aren't working, the underperformers, the campaigns that are just targeted wrong and just spending money. And that's the thing that I personally will never be okay with, is like, why wouldn't you just fix the problem and then the problem's gone?
I don't know.
Because it's
People
hard,
are
because it
mystery.
involves,
Well, it's work for sure.
it's work. It's a lot of work to fix problems. It's more work to fix the problems and get it right than it is to just ignore it.
So we have to pick a person of the day.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
Like, I really want to give it to Chloe just because we gave her such a hard time. But I also feel, but it all comes from a place of love. But I feel like I should, maybe I should just give it to her because that was mean. I'm sorry we brought your criminal history into this situation, Chloe. So thank you for coming and contributing. Being our person of the day entitles you to one free apple. You just have to purchase it your own self. So it's like free from our standpoint. And then you like bake it into a tartlet or something. Mm-hmm. So this is normally the part of the show where Brogan would tell you something about his grandmother, but I don't know anything about his grandmother. So I'll tell you a story about the reason that Chris can't go to the Piggly Wiggly anymore. So speaking of analytics, it's like how many stores has Chris been banned from? So
this is Chris Brogan, not Chris
Brogan.
Penn.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I don't know if Chris Penn can go to the Piggly Wiggly or not, but Brogan,
I can find out.
Cannot. And so, apparently there was a misunderstanding over the definition of chicken cutlet and what exactly, if you ask for one, what it entitles one to. And it turns out. So he still will agree to disagree on that subject to this day.